All right, so tonight we are going to spend some time looking at the 13 items of business that have been sent out to the presbyteries for vote by the General Assembly, the 226th General Assembly. And before we do that, we're going to pray. So please pray with me. Loving and gracious God, I do wonder sometimes if you smile as you watch us Presbyterians and the ways that we organize and do our business. And I wonder if at other times you nod and think, yes, it's good. You come together, you deliberate, and then you ask other bodies to be a part of the deliberation, that we do this in community with one another. And maybe sometimes you shake your head, but I think that's probably pretty normal. So be with us tonight as we look at these items of business so that we can understand and be prepared for that work of deliberation and voting in just a few weeks. Help us have clear minds so we can ask good questions, and understand the business that will be before us. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. I am going to share screen in a minute so we can all play along. But in the meantime, let me put the direct link to the amendment booklet in the chat. Um, like I said, there are 13 items of business, 12 are amendments to the Book of Order. One is an ecumenical agreement. And so that'll be a first for me. I don't ever recall yeah, an ecumenical agreement coming up for presbytery vote since I've been ordained. So, um, yeah, little history that we get to be a part of. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to walk through them. Please do not hesitate to jump in and ask questions along the way. We're not a big group, but I don't want to take the chance of missing you. So So we're all on the same page. As you know, the 226th General Assembly met this summer in Salt Lake City, Utah. Jeanette Zipf, who's with us tonight, was our ruling elder commissioner. Matthew Crowan, who was our young adult advisory delegate. And Caitlin Gartland, who is not able to join us tonight, was our teaching elder commissioner. So they participated in the committee work ahead of the plenaries where these items of business were approved. So they got to vote on this already. And if they're commissioners to our December Presbytery meeting, they can vote again. How about that? So all of these proposed items of business were approved in the form they come to us now by the General Assembly. And when they come to us as Newcastle Presbytery, our role is to vote them up or down, yes or no. There's no amending, there's no making it better. We can't perfect it. The General Assembly has done that work. If we feel that a particular amendment is too deeply flawed or doesn't fit with our call to be this particular body of Christ, then the appropriate thing is to vote no. If we think that it is appropriate, if it is part of who we should be, then the appropriate thing is to vote yes. We have a preamble letter from our stated clerk and then the listing of the items of business, which are in order based on where they appear in the Book of Orders. So there's no ranking. It's not like A is best and L is worse than an F grade. There's no ranking. This is just the order as you see. Um, Starting with one amendment to the foundations of Presbyterian polity, the bulk being to the form of government section, two amendments to the church discipline section, and then that final item, the Episcopal Presbyterian agreement. All right, so here we go. F. 10403, Amendment 24A. This amendment seeks to add language to the paragraph subtitled Unity and Diversity in the Foundations of Presbyterian Polity section, uh, related to the openness to the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So this directive language is true for all of them. The deleted text is struck out, strike through, added text is in italics. The bold text is the context. So what is being changed is either has the strike through or the italics. In this case, the amendment is seeking to add language to this paragraph, specifically the language of gender identity and sexual orientation. The context is the context of non-discrimination, which is captured in this sentence. There is therefore no place in the life of the church for discrimination against any person. So that sentence captures the spirit of the whole paragraph, but in order to lift up particular groups of people who have been discriminated against historically and continuously, or continuing, we've added a list. That list is in the second sentence. The list currently includes, well, first of all, in Christ, let's do the important stuff. By the power of the Spirit, God unites persons through baptism. Full stop. Really, that's full stop. In Christ, by the power of the Spirit, God unites us in baptism. But all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So therefore, we're going to go further. And that is regardless of race, ethnicity, age, sex, the proposed addition, gender identity, sexual orientation, what is already there, disability, geography, or theological conviction. So that is the First Amendment, and it's the first one we're going to take up as a presbytery at our December 3rd meeting. Any questions about this amendment? It seeks to add 2 categories to the list. So
I would ask a question in general, and I know this isn't part of what's changing, part of what is being proposed here, but I'm curious about the inclusion of theological conviction.
Yeah. Yeah. So no place in the life of the church for discrimination against any person. Yeah, and I don't know if theological conviction was added separately or was always part of the list, but that has been one of the hallmarks that we've tried to live into, that we can hold that big tent. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So my question, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good, because I can't see anybody on the screen. So are we making any of these qualities definitions of personhood? Because the subsequent line seems like it would cover everything here.
You're right. The subsequent line does cover everything. And the Advisory Committee on the Constitution said, you don't need a list here. And there's already a list here. You don't need a list at all. You don't need to add to a list. But the reason the list is there and the reason these 2 particular identities are being sought to be added to the list is because we have historically discriminated against people because of these things.
Yeah, as with all the others. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, both within the church and within society. So it's a way for us to say we mean it and we recognize that we haven't always been true to that commitment.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense historically. Good. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Shall we move on to B?
Yes.
B. And then, so the other thing I'll just point out for your information is that with the actual items of business in this booklet, you get background and rationale. Where did it come from? And then you get different advice because these are amendments to the Constitution. The Advisory Committee on the Constitution, the ACC, will always have at least a sentence as as their advice, since it is constitutional and will have an impact. And then there's often comments from other groups who have a reason to speak to an item of business, whether for or against. So we hear on this one, the LGBTQIA plus Advocacy Task Force, the Advocacy Committee for Women and Gender Justice, the Advisory Committee on Social Witness Policy. All of these groups have something to say about this edition. Racial Equity Advocacy Committee, General Assembly Committee on Representation. So that information, those comments are for information, may help answer questions, but are not the business itself. So when we're voting, we're not voting on the comments, we're voting on the actual change itself. So here we are. B moves us to our form of government in the first chapter, G 104. And this has to do with the congregation. This particular amendment is seeking to add an entire section. See, it's all in italics. And the entire section will be titled, if it's passed by a majority of presbyteries, Other Forms of Corporate Witness, Worshiping Communities, etc. Okay, whew. I'm going to read this so we hear it and as well as see it. In circumstances where the formation of a traditional ecclesiastically and legally organized congregation is not desired or deemed appropriate, and a worshiping community has been formally recognized by a presbytery according to its own definition, presbyteries and congregations may work together with such a group to provide supervision and support. Whew, how's that for a sentence? Such recognized groups shall be under the mutually agreed upon oversight of a minister of the word and sacrament approved by the presbytery, shall include at least one ruling elder in their chosen leadership, and shall function under the financial, legal, and disciplinary sponsorship of an ecclesial council, parentheses, either a session or a presbytery. The sponsoring council, which is either a session or a presbytery, shall, in consultation with the worshiping community, authorize any celebrations of the sacraments within the group in accordance with the Directory for Worship. Membership records for group participants desiring to be formally enrolled as baptized, active, or affiliate members in the PCUSA shall be maintained by the sponsoring council, which is either a session or a presbytery. Such groups shall not hold property and may not undertake any financial, legal, or contractual obligations apart from their sponsoring council. They shall adhere to the sponsoring council's required policies on sexual misconduct, harassment, child and youth protection, and anti-racism. Presbyteries shall determine appropriate means of representation and participation of such groups in and through the sponsoring councils, session and or presbytery.
Wow.
Woo!
Wow.
So that's a lot.
That's a
Yeah, it
lot.
is a lot.
But so two things. This amendment is seeking to speak to a gap in our polity. In 2012, we launched a movement to start 1,001 new worshiping communities. Woohoo! And so presbyteries started planting worshiping communities that may or may never become a traditional ecclesiastically and legally organized congregation. But it wasn't clear where they fit in our polity, because our polity is based on the congregation, on the session, on ruling elders and teaching elders. Where does the CrossFit ministry fit in? Or the sweaty sheep, which was uh, long distance runners and athletes. Where do they fit in to the congregational structure? So this has been in the works for a while. It seeks to be broad enough and flexible enough that it can be adapted by a session or a presbytery to fit the needs. Now, we in Newcastle Presbytery have operated kind of within these bounds, especially with Church on Main. Church on Main, for instance, had a request for baptism. Was that last year, I believe? But they're not an organized congregation. They are a new worshiping community. And so they went through our Commission on Ministers and Congregations for the approval of that baptism. And we, as a presbytery, we are the council holding that record. A lot of presbyteries have treated new worshiping communities that way, where the presbytery holds the record of membership, of baptism, and approves the celebration of sacraments. So that's the why of this. Um, there are pieces of it that I suspect may be more binding than they need to be, especially
Mhm.
this shall be under the mutually agreed upon oversight of a
Yeah.
minister of word and sacrament. I feel like that will probably be amended in the future if this is passed, because we have commissioned ruling elders who can lead and should be leading new worshiping communities. And within our presbytery, a second new worshiping community is being led by a United Methodist minister,
Mhm.
which wouldn't fall under that shall. Um, and we could say that was okay.
We also have Church on Main rents building space. Those are legal
Sounds
contracts
great.
that they
Yeah.
engage in.
Yeah,
Uh, there are a number of things. We have not approved their having communion.
no, no.
There are a lot of things that we have not complied with on this.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we have to,
yeah.
there are a lot of shalls in here.
There are a lot of shalls in here. So if this is passed by a majority of our presbyteries, it will give some very specific guidance to all of our presbyteries for how we shall uh, create guidelines for new worshiping communities or other communities that are not traditional ecclesiastical and legally organized congregations. Questions about this one?
One question.
Sure, Terry.
Um, the language of a sponsoring council,
Mhm.
it just sounds like there's an assumption that this junior partner is making its way toward being Presbyterian, and it might not be. I wonder if cooperating or some other word might better cover the idea that some NWCs are probably going to want always to be independent.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, and in this case, the language, I believe, uses sponsoring because they they will either be under an oversight of a session as a sponsoring council or a presbytery as a sponsoring council. Without those connections, they do not have a link into the PCUSA. So there is a sense that they are sponsored into the body.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I hear what you're saying. The relationship in most cases will be more collaborative.
Yeah, because they're not exactly a church plant. I mean, if they can behave like a church plant and eventually become an independent body that has ties to Presbyterianism, that sounds different than,
Hmm.
well, I guess maybe it doesn't sound all that different from sponsoring church. The word's just bothering me, and I'm not sure entirely why.
That's okay. That's okay. It may strike our ears. I mean, the place where we hear the language of sponsor is often
Patriarchy.
entering into a membership,
Yeah. Yep. Mhm.
sponsored into a particular body. And so I think that's the meaning they're going for. Lyle?
Yeah, the sentence, such recognized groups shall be under the mutual agreed upon oversight of a minister of the word and sacrament approved by the presbytery, shall include at least one ruling elder in their chosen leadership. So the ruling elder would have been, in my mind anyway, would have been ordained by some existing church.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I think of Church on Main regarding this piece, this sentence, and we have the oversight of a minister of the word and sacrament
Mhm.
in Brooke Scott. But at least one ruling elder, I'm assuming that's happening. And I just wonder what congregation is close. I'd be curious about who that might be. And are we fulfilling that, or is that something that's, if it's passed, we would have to complete?
I
And
can answer that,
Mhm.
okay,
Lyle, that we have always had one ruling elder, at least one ruling elder on that board, on Church of Maine's board. Currently, I think it is somebody who moved to that area who was ordained in a Presbyterian church, not in our presbytery. So there's not a direct link there, but she is an elder.
I
Um,
see.
Mhm.
and
Okay,
and if somebody rotated off, we'd have to find another person who is an elder.
I see.
I'm
So
not sure about Church on Main. But then they are also co-parented, so to speak, by the United Methodist Church.
Yeah, Riverfront.
you mean
Oh, sorry.
Riverfront?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Riverfront.
Okay. And then the sentence on holding property.
Hmm.
Mhm.
All right. Uh, that also just that actually makes good sense to me. And in the case of Church on Main, it's Presbytery sponsored. In the case of the Riverfront, is it also Presbytery sponsored?
It's shared
It's
between the Presbyterian and the United Methodist Church.
Right.
Yes, I know it's shared denominationally, but I wondered if Presbytery. I know that First and Central was active in establishing the Riverfront ministry some years ago, and so I wondered if it was a session, but it's the Presbytery.
Right. It is the Presbytery.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Thank you for that. And Church on Main does not have any property, right?
The Presbytery has the property. They
Right.
operate it and they function in it, but it's at, like all of our churches, it actually belongs to the Presbytery.
Mhm.
Well, yes. I just wasn't sure if they even had property. I'm happy to hear that it sounds like they do.
They're in
Because
the Old Forest Church.
the what? The old what?
Forest.
Yeah,
Forest Presbytery.
That's Church on Main.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm talking about Riverfront.
No,
It
they don't have
rents
a building.
it. That's what I thought. It rents space in the summer, and then they worship out of Grace Methodist in the winter, right?
Except this winter, they've moved to space of the Delaware Contemporary uh,
Oh,
down on
okay.
the riverfront. So they're
So
meeting.
it's something they're renting then.
I don't know that they're paying for the space. I don't know the league. I
Mhm.
don't know the details of that. I just know that that's where they're meeting during the winter.
Okay. Well, that would be kind of cool if they didn't have to pay.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. All right. Thank you. Those are my,
Yeah,
I'm ready to pass it. I think uh,
I,
this makes good Presbyterian sense. It's a little bit Presbyterianish,
it's very
Mm, it
Presbyterianish.
is.
Yeah,
but
can
but
I
I
ask
think
one? Oh, sorry.
it covers our, it crosses our T's, dots our I's, and this is the way we go about it. So we might as well be consistent.
yeah. Terry, you were going to ask another question?
Yeah, the ruling elder. When Tracy described this person who was a ruling elder, they left their church in another presbytery. It was in that church they were a ruling elder. Is their ruling eldership portable?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
okay, that's what I'm wondering. It
You
is.
are an
Okay.
elder all life long.
I know, but I thought a ruling elder specifically meant that you were serving on a session.
No, ruling
You can
elder
be
is
a
the
sitting.
ordination.
Right. Mhm.
Okay, thank you, thank you. That's clear. Thank you.
Yeah, carry it with you. All right. Whew, that's the longest one. All right, so 24C, also book form of government. Now looking at the ordered ministries of the church. So 24C is tied back to 24A, adding language to the categories against which specifically we are saying we will not discriminate against. But because it's in a different part of the book of order, it is separate and is the third amendment on our list. So this is having to do with the process of examination for ordination for everybody. This is not just this is not just for teaching elders. This is general examination for ordination, where we as a presbytery would uh, exercise this would be at the category of teaching elder. All right, so again, nothing's being deleted, but we are seeking to add some language to this paragraph. I'll read the whole paragraph so we have our context. So standards for ordained service reflect the church's desire to submit joyfully to the lordship of Jesus Christ in all aspects of life. The council responsible for ordination and or installation, so that is the session at the congregational level and the presbytery, at clearly the presbytery level. So the council responsible for ordination and or installation shall examine each candidate's calling, gifts, preparation, and suitability for the responsibilities of ordered ministry. The examination shall include, but not be limited to, a determination of the candidate's ability and commitment to fulfill all requirements as expressed in the constitutional questions for ordination and installation. This is the section that's suggested as an addition. The historic principles of church order and in the principles of participation and representation found in F 10403, which is the section that we looked at in the first amendment. Councils shall be guided by scripture and the confessions in applying standards to individual candidates. So the impact of this is again a lifting up of a particular desire to be sure that when we are inviting people into leadership in the church as deacons, as ruling elders, and as teaching elders, that they're able to wholeheartedly uh, follow what we have said is essential. So the requirement to examine is already there. The the breadth of the examination has been expressed in the constitutional questions for ordination and installation, which you may remember includes saying yes to the Book of Order. Will you be guided by our polity and abide by our discipline? the addition of the historic principles of church order and the principles of participation and representation is meant to raise up something that the General Assembly feels we need to particularly give attention to. So the reason the historic principles of church order are included here is they include the language, uh, God alone is Lord of the conscience, and the stipulation that each council has the right and the authority to discern for themselves who shall be elected, ordained, and installed as leaders. And so it's putting in tension the right of each council to discern for themselves who shall lead them with the principles of participation and representation. And I'll be more blunt. So the concern was, what of our churches and our ministers or our candidates for ministry who struggle with inclusion of people whose gender identity or sexual orientation uh, seem to them to be not right, not correct. Some would use the language sinful. So what happens if there is a church who would say, we would not ordain somebody in a same gender relationship. We would not ordain somebody who is transgender. How do we hold that stance alongside, in addition to our principles of participation and representation, which may be expanded to include not discriminating specifically against gender identity and sexual orientation? The way we hold that tension is in the language of the principles of church order, the historic principles of church order, that give each council the right and the authority to discern who is best to lead them. In other words, the presbytery is not going to force a church to ordain or install an elder, ruling elder, or deacon, or a teaching elder who is an inappropriate fit for that congregation. However, we are going to ask and do our best to stress the importance of being honest in our examinations at all levels of the church, at the session level and at the presbytery level, to be sure that this is the church that people are called to leadership in, which we do already, regardless of whether or not these amendments pass. In this presbytery, we do that already because we hold the wide open welcome of the body of Christ to be a very serious thing. Whew, that was a lot of language for me about this particular amendment. Are there questions?
We are going to end up with, as we once upon a time had historically Black churches, we are going to end up with historically gay churches under this language. It feels exclusionary. It feels like it's going to be the burden of COMC to say, well, that church would be fine with a gay minister, that church would not. And that doesn't feel like full acceptance.
Yeah.
But it may be honest. For instance,
And may I throw something in there?
mhm.
Terry, let me quick little story. When Dover was looking at Mark Parsons and Mark was looking at Dover, I kept trying, telling him to look at a couple of other of our churches that I thought made better sense. And he kept saying, I'm really just in love with Dover. And I didn't say this to him, but my thought was, I'm not sure they're ready, and look how that's going.
We weren't sure we were ready either.
Yeah,
I know that's come up in discussions of
it's
amongst other
so funny.
people of
When
discuss.
when Milford called Rick
Mm-hmm.
Now, nobody's, I didn't say to Rick, oh, think twice, nothing like that. But many of us were going like, who knew Milford was ready for this, And look how wonderfully he had his 2-year anniversary there, and they had like the good china out and a big party. My God. So, there are a lot of times where the freedom of the body to follow their own conscience is going to be a wider welcome than we were giving them credit for.
Mm.
So I just wanted to point out those two things just in our recent history. We wouldn't have stood in the way of it. But there were things where I was thinking, oh man, I'm not sure that's going to work. And fortunately, God had a better idea.
Well
And on
said.
the flip side, the first church I served was really not ready to have their first female pastor. And the presbytery knew that, but no one talked to me about that.
Mm.
So I didn't go in, other than what I had picked up along the edges, I didn't realize the resistance was as deep and wide as it really was.
That's persuasive. Mm.
So, I mean, and I've said this to other churches and other presbyteries, and I'll say it to churches here too. I will fight for your right to be the church God is calling you to be, as long as you are loving God with all your heart and seeking to love your neighbor as yourself. And so the pairing of the historic principles of church order and the principles of participation and representation is intentional, even though there is tension between them.
There was a lot of discussion at GA when this one was up, and one of the sort of concerns that was brought up by people was that they were worried that this was going to come across as prescribing an answer and not letting people speak honestly. And one of the things that ended up in this discussion was the intention of this amendment. Now, whether it will achieve this obviously remains to be seen upon if it gets approved. But the intention of this is to force a conversation so people are open and honest. And if that is if the results of that discussion are negative, at least they had that discussion, and it's not a place of, okay, we've called you and now we're running into issues. Like the point of this is just sort of get the, I don't want to say baggage, but get the point, it's get the perspectives in the open, and where that conversation goes, let it happen. But let it happen. Don't just let it fester.
Yeah.
True.
All right. Shall we move on?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah.
So number 4, continuing in the second chapter of the form of government. This is, I think, about the shortest one. So this is the section of temporary pastoral relationships. Currently, the Book of Orders says a person serving in a temporary pastoral relationship, which is a bridge pastor, a transitional pastor, an interim pastor, a state of supply, I mean, all those different things, anyone who is not installed. Currently, the contract is limited to 12 months, not to exceed 12 months, is invited for a specific period. And so what is being sought is a change to lengthen that to 36 months, not to exceed. So it doesn't have to be 36 months, but not to exceed 36 months, which is renewable with the approval of the presbytery. And I'll just say most of our transitional pastors serve close to 2 years, sometimes 3 years, depending on the work. And I was a temporary pastor for 5 years before the church petitioned the presbytery to install me. But We have had temporary pastors who have served for decades. The language just refers to the kind of relationship, which is with the session and not the congregation. So that's the change here, allowing a contract for 36 months, up to 36 months, which is renewable. Any questions? It's pretty straightforward. Oh, and you'll see, this is a one-pager. The ACC says it's helpful. There you go. Next one, pastoral relationships. And so I'll say that this particular amendment is repeated again later. This one is related to temporary pastoral relationships. And then later in the form of government, when the language is about installed pastoral relationships, this language is repeated again. So we'll see this a second time, but it's a different chapter. That's why they're split up. And I'm saying that so you don't go, why does this only apply to temporary pastoral relationships? That doesn't make any sense. Hold on. So this amendment is seeking to add language, and that language is at the bottom. When the temporary pastoral relationship ends, no non-disclosure agreement shall be allowable. A non-disclosure agreement, also known as a confidentiality agreement, is an agreement that outlines confidential material, knowledge, or information that is to remain confidential. Such an agreement binds the party or parties who have signed it and prevents them from discussing any information included in the contract with anyone not authorized by the agreement. So we have the definition of what it is, but the action language is this sentence. No non-disclosure agreement shall be allowable. Any questions about that? We don't disallow it right now. It's bad practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue against non-disclosure in the church. This would seek to create the strong barrier.
I think it's healthy.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at the history of churches with sexual molestation.
Mm-hmm.
This is healthy.
Or really any conflict that leads to a pastor leaving in the midst of conflict. If there's a non-disclosure agreement, how do you fully deal with the conflict? There's always a secret. Yeah.
And people make up what they don't know, the details. They sort of imagine into it and well, this must have happened. And then that becomes, well, that probably happened. And that becomes, well, that did happen. And
Yeah.
it can get
Very
pretty
healthy.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So this one has a little bit of stuff with it. The next paragraph has to do with preparation for ministry, the next amendment, and accommodations to particular circumstances. So this is when somebody who is in the ordination process needs accommodations around the ordination exams, which we've allowed for a long, long time. This does both strike out and add in. So I'll go ahead and read the whole paragraph. When a presbytery concludes there are good and sufficient reasons for accommodations to the particular circumstances of an individual seeking ordination, it may, by a 3/4 vote, waive any of the requirements for ordination in G 206, except for those of G 20607D. If a presbytery judges that there are good and sufficient reasons why a candidate should not be required to satisfy the requirements of G 20607D, it shall approve by 3/4 vote some alternate means by which to ascertain the readiness of the candidate for ministry in the areas covered by the standard ordination exams. Currently, it reads, a full account of the reasons for a waiver or alternate means to ascertain readiness shall be included in the minutes of the presbytery and communicated to the presbytery to which an inquirer or candidate may be transferred. The proposed amendment would change the language to the existence of any waiver or alternate means to ascertain readiness with confidential details omitted shall be communicated to the presbytery to which an inquirer or candidate may be transferred. So this takes out the full account, what it's proposing, taking out the requirement for a full account of the reasons for a waiver or alternate means. And it removes the requirement that the account, which wouldn't be required anyway, but the account be included in the minutes of the presbytery. And instead provides a layer of protection that currently is not available to those who seek an alternate means of ascertaining readiness. Clear as mud? Questions?
Yeah, it's about as clear as mud. Yes, for me. So we here, if we approve this, we as a church, we would be saying, if an individual needs a waiver of the ordination exams of completing satisfactorily the ordination exams, it needs to be communicated. That's very healthy. With confidential details omitted.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it bothers me a little bit because I don't know what that means. Then we've got a secret for this particular individual. And now this doesn't say it has to be, it says it may do it this way, correct? Am I reading that right?
Well, the existence of a waiver or alternate means shall be communicated to the presbytery to which an inquirer or candidate may be transferred. And so what will be communicated, which is the bulk of what you would need to know, is that candidate A took an alternate means, an alternate exam for the Bible content. So here's an example that I'm aware of. Candidate A experiences high test anxiety and has, documented medical documentation that multiple choice tests are exceptionally difficult and produce a high level of stress and anxiety. Candidate A is forced anyway to take the Bible content exam, which is a multiple choice exam, 3 times and fails each time. Finally, the Presbyterian question says, well, we can do an alternate exam. And so the Committee on Preparation for Ministry creates an alternate exam that fulfills the requirement of ascertaining readiness in knowledge of the Bible. The shape of that exam is approved by the presbytery. So the presbytery approves, this is what the exam will be. This will be how it'll be administered. This is the alternate. And candidate A passes with flying colors. It's clear the candidate knows the Bible very well and is able to speak convincingly and extensively about the biblical witness. So what is reported is candidate A took an alternate exam. This was the form of the exam, in this case, a verbal exam with a panel of 3 people, and passed. The reason for the exam may have been communicated verbally, but it is not the action. the action of the shape of the alternate exam is what is communicated in writing, both in the minutes, because the presbytery took action to approve it, and would be then communicated appropriately to another presbytery.
So what would be the confidential details that would be omitted?
The
The
medical background.
the medical background
Right.
for and
Mhm.
and the presbytery approving would have to ask themselves the question, does the inability of this candidate to take this kind of exam, will that impact the functioning of this individual in the exercise of ministry?
Yeah, and that's part of the ascertaining readiness.
Right.
Right, right. That's trusting the higher council. Yeah.
Mhm. Because the requirement to some alternate means by which to ascertain readiness of the candidate for ministry, that requirement remains. It's just that a standardized test may not tell us whether or not someone will be a good pastor.
Mhm. Mhm.
No, that's something I would want the psychologists in Newcastle Presbytery. At least we have a psychological evaluation for all candidates.
Everyone
I
does
would
it.
want, I would, I would want the psychologist to explore that for that individual, because I can't tell you, because I'm not knowledgeable enough to know if the inability to take that kind of an exam indicates some. I realize about stress. I have a granddaughter that uh, has difficulty with exams, and she's in college right now. Okay, and so I'm not putting that. That's a real, can be a real uh, issue. I'm not sure. In her case, I don't want to give you all those. That may take all night to give you all those details. But I want to know if that's you got my point.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so
Okay.
I mean that's part of that whole preparation process, right?
Right. So that's something that's an issue for the CPM in any
Mhm.
given presbytery.
Yeah, and
Right.
usually it would be the CPM bringing the request for an alternate exam to a presbytery. I mean,
Right.
that's the appropriate place. A CPM who would already say, we see the gifts of ministry in this particular candidate, and we don't believe that struggling with this particular form of testing uh, shows their gifts.
Right.
Yeah. And just to be clear, the example I gave was not from this presbytery.
Yeah.
It's from a different presbytery.
That's all right. Um,
I can imagine something.
I'm not out for a witch hunt to see which, well, if we have any candidates in this category at all.
I want to be clear.
Says, but you see, when it says that the higher judicator, I think Terry's comment was good. You have to trust that the higher judicatory above the congregational level is has made this decision, and this person has been declared ready to serve, and confidential details omitted. That's the part that, um, and
Yeah.
so if the past, uh, I could live with this, I think, as a fellow Presbyterian. But if I were on the CPM, I'd want the cycle. I'd want to be certain that this doesn't mean we're sending out into the church a somebody who can't function well,
Mm,
some
mm,
capacity.
mm,
That's all.
mm.
And the rules doesn't have any flexibility. It says it shall be omitted.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the uh, accepting presbytery will know that an alternative exam took place.
Mhm.
That should
And
do it.
this,
Yeah.
and this is also, I'll just point out that this really is if an inquirer or candidate ends up being transferred from one presbytery to another before
Mhm.
ordination.
Mhm.
Right. Well, the calling presbytery may not, often is not the presbytery of authorization.
No, yeah, no, this is while they're still in process. Because
Mhm.
once somebody's been certified, ready to receive a call,
Right.
we trust
Mhm.
that everything is in place. And I don't go looking. I've never gone looking for, did they pass their exams? What was it? If a candidate has been certified, ready to receive a call, we're trusting that the presbytery that candidate is under care in has done their work. This
Well,
is if, for instance, if somebody's under care, they're a member of a particular church, and for some reason end up moving to another part of the country. Maybe a spouse is transferred in their job, or something happens and they move away from where they're under care. They would have to join a church in that new place and continue the care process in a new place. And so this is if somebody who is in the care process is transferred while in that process, not once they're a candidate ready to receive a call.
oh,
Yeah, it's a very
oh,
limited thing. So it'd be a CP.
oh, that makes it very different.
Yeah,
Because I was thinking what you just said, once they're approved and ready to go into the church, then why are we messing around with this?
yeah.
Mm.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Um,
Okay.
yeah. So it's this is very particular that window of time of being under care.
I can imagine another circumstance, though, in our web-connected world, if somebody accomplished all of their preparation and their testing through distance learning because they live on a remote island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, but then there they are, they still need to test them a different way, test them at distance.
There are all
Sounds
kinds of
silly.
possibilities, which is great. Yeah.
I like it.
Other questions about? Yeah, it's a very narrow
Not going to happen a lot. Yeah.
no. But it
Well,
clearly has happened.
but
And
Mhm.
just where in the paragraph does it say that this is because the candidate is wanting to move from one presbytery to another?
communicated to the presbytery to which an inquirer or candidate may be transferred.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
I'm
the
I
very
missed.
last.
I okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, now I got it. There it is.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Okay, I'll shut up now. I understand
Okay.
what's going on.
No, and I mean, this is helpful because the questions you have tonight will probably be echoed when we bring them to the presbytery. So I will know, and Tracy will know that we need to be clear about the actual context of this particular change. Yeah. Okay.
And we do sometimes use the word candidate when we're talking about someone who has already been ordained and is coming to a church to interview.
Yeah.
I mean, we do use that word candidate, but
Mhm.
in this context and the part of the form of government where it falls, it's about preparation for ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it applies also, but within this presbytery, we've seen persons both profoundly deaf and entirely blind, and they certainly required alternate testing.
Mhm. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and in the school system, we have individual education plans, IEPs, to help students thrive. Uh,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so this is our form of an IEP for the ordination examination process. Yeah. All right. Remember when I said the one about no
Yep.
confidentiality, no non-disclosures? We were going to see it again. Here it is. So an installed pastor, of course, the pastoral relationship is dissolved by the congregation. So that's why the language here is in relation to the congregational meeting. But it is the exact same language. No non-disclosure agreement shall be allowable, and then the exact definition. but in this case, attached to the dissolution of an installed pastoral relationship and not a temporary relationship. So, any questions about that? All right. That was take 2 of non-disclosures. All right, the next one, 24H, administration of mission. This is a simple addition. We have been expanding our policy requirements, and that's the section that this is in. And it's to add the language adults with vulnerabilities. So what would happen, all councils shall adopt and implement the following policies: a sexual misconduct policy, a harassment policy, a child, youth, and adults with vulnerabilities protection policy, and an anti-racism policy. And we'll see similar language in a couple of the other amendments that are coming out of this General Assembly. The intention being to lift up the fact that there are adults who are vulnerable, and our policies need to recognize that vulnerability as well. And if all of our policies only talk about having 2 adults with kids and don't have provision for vulnerable adults, then we're missing an important population. Yeah. Any questions about that? Presbytery. Woohoo! This came from the committee I co-moderated. Yay! So this has to do with the requirement for concurrences. So currently, unless a majority of presbyteries approve this, currently, if Newcastle Presbytery writes an overture to amend the Book of Order or to ask the General Assembly to take up certain business, like the business around Guatemala that we concurred with last year, at least one other presbytery has to concur and say, yes, we support this in order for it to come before the General Assembly. That was put into place, I think, in 2012 or 2014. The intention was to make sure that the assembly was taking up business that more than one presbytery was interested in. So the presbytery with the pet project needs somebody to say yes to their pet project was kind of the intent. In practice, what has happened is one presbytery has made it their own practice to concur with everything, so nothing gets left behind. And the other thing that has happened is every winter between January and whatever the deadline is, there is a flurry of emails between presbytery leaders trying to figure out who's meeting when so we can get concurrences. It's a pain, actually. And it's also internally for the Office of the General Assembly and the staff that are managing General Assembly business. It has been a lot of extra work. So, all of that to be say, this proposed amendment seeks to take away the requirement for concurrence. So you see this language that is stricken, that have received a concurrence from at least one presbytery, remove that requirement, but allow for concurrences. The presbyteries can concur with proposed overtures because there is some power in being able to say this overture has 20 presbyteries that have concurred with it. So allowing for it but not requiring it. That's this. I hope it passes. Any questions about that? It'll make the run up to GA a little less hectic.
Mhm.
All right, this next one also came from the committee. I co-moderated, and it is updating, which has needed to happen for a long time, the composition. How do we establish the composition of the General Assembly? And so one of the members of the committee that took up um, this work, the General Assembly Procedures Committee, did a lot of number crunching to try to figure out what would give us as close to 500 commissioners as possible, ruling elders, teaching elders. So this is the recommendation to change the allocation. So presbyteries of 6,000 members or less, one ruling elder and one minister. So, if Dover keeps going, full out the way they've been going, we might get over that 6,000 member mark and get two ruling elders and two teaching elders. Look at that.
All right.
It actually would be within our reach. The next group would be 6,001 to 12,000, two ruling elders, two ministers of the word and sacrament, then 12,001 to 19,000, 19,000 or one or more. What has happened is we don't have any presbyteries in these number ranges and haven't for a while. So we've had these number ranges that are meaningless, while we have a lot of presbyteries that have dropped below 8,000, but actually are in the 6,000 to 8,000 member range. So this would reconfigure the allocation of commissioners, starting with the next General Assembly. This would be passed soon enough. It'd go into effect a year before the next General Assembly. Yay! Questions on this?
It's just acknowledging reality. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And also helping us to continue our own commitment to representation, because
Mhm.
if the number of commissioners gets smaller, it becomes a less representative group.
Yep.
So this will actually increase the number of commissioners, which is one of the things we were hoping for.
That is good.
All right, and again, very little uh yeah, very little comment. Okay, last two proposed amendments are to the rules of discipline section. Whew. So, well, actually, it's church discipline. Sorry, we changed it. So this seeks to add language to D 70501, referral to investigating committee is the section. And I'll go ahead and read the whole thing. The language to be added is in italics. When a clerk of session or the stated clerk of a presbytery receives an allegation without undertaking further inquiry, that clerk shall then report to the council only that an offense has been alleged without naming the person accused or the nature of the alleged offense, and shall refer the statement of allegation promptly to an investigating committee, which shall conduct an inquiry as defined below. So adding person, so it's not naming the accused, but the person accused. And the shall refer, which should be in there anyway. The new language, pursuant to G 40302, the clerk shall report to civil legal authorities any knowledge of harm or risk of harm related to the physical abuse, neglect, and/or sexual molestation or abuse of a minor or adult lacking mental capacity. And then the clerk of session or stage clerk shall also inform the accuser of the disciplinary process and their rights and responsibilities in the process. So this proposes to put in our church discipline section the requirement to report, to make it clear that if the allegation includes any allegation of harm, then there is a requirement to report to civil legal authorities. So that's this amendment. Any questions on that?
No.
No.
No, I thought that they, along with the rest of us, were mandatory reporters. Is that not the case?
It varies state by state.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, in Delaware and Maryland, we are. And
Okay.
as far as the Presbytery is concerned, we are. And so this makes it clear that regardless of state law, in the
Hmm.
church, in the PCUSA, we have a mandate to report when there's an allegation. Yeah, that
That makes sense.
is related to a minor or an adult lacking mental capacity, using that language. I wish it was vulnerable adult because that is the language proposed earlier, but the intention's the same. Yeah. All right.
Cindy,
Yep.
Cindy, I'm sorry. I have a question about that, and I just read it again. Um, does that, does it, maybe I should know this. Does this apply in a case where someone in the church may hear or may receive this allegation about that involves someone who is not a member of the church?
Hmm.
I don't know how I'm looking at this from a clerk of sessions point of view, and while this is not an existing situation, that because we deal with so many people that are homeless,
Mhm.
um, I'm wondering
Yeah.
what your thoughts are. It's not outlined here at all.
Yeah. Yeah, this really is specifically about a formal allegation. And there are some guidelines around um, who can make an allegation, who an allegation can be made against. Uh, so in general, they would not apply if it was somebody talking about somebody outside the church, unless it was a church member who was engaged in harm, who is perpetrating harm. So if somebody came to you as clerk of session and said, this member of your church, I saw them do this thing, then there might be a requirement, although an allegation is usually written and has other things attached to it. But beyond that, I mean, in Delaware, if anyone suspects harm to a minor or vulnerable adult, Delaware has a pretty broad mandatory reporting law.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. So it may not
Okay.
be your clerk of session hat. It may be your volunteering uh, with neighbor's hat. Yeah,
Mm. Okay, thank you.
it's a different, yeah, different thing. All right, the last amendment, and then we'll take a couple minutes with the ecumenical agreement. Um, uh, Seeks to clarify administrative leave. So in our church discipline process, um, there is a process for determining whether there is a requirement for administrative leave when an allegation has been received. And so this amendment adds the language of paid, makes it very clear, just in case it wasn't obvious, but it's paid administrative leave. And then adds the language, the cost shall be borne by the employing entity whenever possible, or be shared by the presbytery as necessary. So just clarification language in this section. Any questions about that one? All right, let's talk about ecumenism. Woo-hoo. All right. I attended a webinar on this, so I would know what I'd be talking about. Because when I saw this, I was like, what? I can talk about the Book of Order. That's my job. What's this? Um, so, as you see the title, Episcopal Presbyterian Agreement on Local Sharing of Ministries. And it's worth taking a look at this. Excuse me. They even set up a website, which I hope is stated here at some point. Here's my nutshell for you. It's a big nutshell. It's more like a Brazil nutshell and less like a peanut. It's a big nutshell. So we, as the Presbyterian Church, engage in ecumenical dialogues with a lot of different partners. We have one ongoing with the Catholic Church around recognizing one another's baptisms. We've engaged in ecumenical conversations with the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, the ELCA, which led to us being able to exchange ministers back and forth. Same thing with the Methodist Church. We're in an ecumenical, ongoing ecumenical conversations there as well, and with the Episcopal Church. So the Episcopal Presbyterian Ecumenical Dialogue has gone through several stages, and this current stage has brought us to the point of being able to, and I'm going to go to the particular language, being able to engage in a limited, orderly exchange of ministers, which tells you that both Episcopalians and Presbyterians have contributed to this language. So the crux of the matter, really, between the Episcopal Church and the Presbyterian Church is in the Episcopal Church, authority is housed in the episcopae, in the bishop. And in the Presbyterian Church, our episcopae is the presbyters, the presbytery. And so the dialogue has gotten to the point where the Episcopal Church says, yes, we recognize we have mostly wrapped our heads around the fact that for you, the presbytery is the bishop, not the presbyters, not Tracy and I. No, the presbytery has the authority and acts with the authority that we give to a bishop. We've gotten that far. And so once the location of authority was accepted and understood, then the ability to begin this limited, orderly exchange of ministers back and forth between our denominations can happen. Now, I will say, the Episcopal Church, because of their timing, won't take this up for approval for a couple years. So we're ahead of them in taking this up. So even if the majority of the presbyteries say yes to this, it will not go into effect until the Episcopal Church takes it up at their next annual conference. All right, it does not pertain to commissioned ruling elders, ordained ruling elders. It's only teaching elders and priests. That's all. And there are significant guidelines. The presbyter, the teaching elder, may be permitted by appropriate ecclesiastical authority, aka the bishop, to serve under following guidelines. Which is all laid out, which goes into which Book of Common Worship can be used, and that has to be approved. It's fairly there's a lot of order to the limited orderly exchange. The bottom line is this is a step towards greater sharing and participation with our Episcopal siblings, our Episcopalian siblings. And so it's being offered with hope that it is a step towards full communion, which we enjoy with the ELCA and with the UCC. There's a lot more words here. A lot more words. Training, examination, oversight, how it gets celebrated, lots of stuff here, including the actual text of the celebration. Um, and
Wow.
a lot of rationale and things with it. I'm trying to see if the link to the website is here. It goes on for a while. I'm going to stop looking for it. That's the nutshell. That's the nutshell. I can try to answer questions if you have them.
I want to make one comment, and that is that the local Delaware Episcopal Diocese took my predecessor at Limestone, the Reverend um, Smith, Willett Smith, is a very good preacher, by the way, and he served in many Episcopal churches for a temporary time uh, after his retirement from Limestone.
Interesting.
So I don't know how they did that, but they did it, and he was well received in nearly every place he went, but he was always temporary. It's like our interim, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So
So,
he was more than pulpit supply, though. He
pardon?
was serving. He was more than pulpit supply. He was serving for lengths of time.
Yes, he was. He would serve for a couple of years, 2 to 3 years, depending on what the bishop wanted him to do. And yes, it was much more than pulpit supply. But this is interesting, and it'll have my vote, affirmative vote, because it is, uh, it just makes sense. And if we can talk to each other and work through some of our language, I am terribly partial to our Presbyterian ways because I really believe it has greater potential for the Holy Spirit to be at work than whenever you put authority in persons. Okay. And that's one of the reasons that I want a strong democracy in as many nations as possible on earth, because for the same reason, I believe God works most effectively when there is a process by which there is it, and of course, democracy, any kind of representation depends on accurate and honest information.
Mhm.
And when
Yeah.
that can happen in a society, then we have a much better chance of functioning effectively and not exclude and reject and ignore certain persons.
Thank you,
So
Lyle.
yeah, and I'll be quiet with that. And with the thank you, I was ready to quit also. Thank you for helping me do that. Terminal facilities, my wife once said, is not your strength, Lyle.
I'm fully on board just because the church from which and through which I went to seminary and entered the Presbyterian process was an ecumenical church, one of whose four denominations was Presbyterianism.
Yeah. And we do have shared congregational witness between Presbyterians and Episcopalians. I know there's a church outside of Cincinnati that is Presbyterian Episcopalian, and they have some interesting governance to weave it together. And they were one of the churches that was used as an example of we're already doing some of this. Maybe Reverend Willett was another example.
Yeah,
So
I
can
think he
we
was.
can we create a form by which we can do more of it that is decent and in order?
He was a gifted man, especially in the art of preaching. He had a wonderful way of relating to people, and he had great humor. And I'm just grateful they put up with me for 14 years after he left.
Well, there you
Hampshire
have,
Valley did find
They didn't have a
Episcopalians the
choice
hardest
because
of
he
all.
quit.
there you go. He wanted to go serve the Episcopal Church. Um, So those are the 13 items of business that we as a presbytery will be voting on when we meet on Zoom on Tuesday, December 3rd. That meeting will start at 4 p.m. We're working on the docket, but yeah, as you
Okay.
see, there's some business. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you all for stopping by. Thank you for Jeanette and Matt and Caitlin, who couldn't be with us, for your service this summer, and appreciate how you were part of the discernment of the Spirit in the 26th General Assembly. Yeah.
I wish our discussions at General Assembly had been so concise as these. Some of them you covered in 10 minutes what we covered in 4 hours. So, uh,
But
Sometimes
speaking of minutes and hours, thank you both for the amount of time you commit to this work. It really is remarkable.
mm,
I
Wonderful.
don't know how you do it.
Zoom helps a lot.
It is a good tool, yeah.
It is a good tool.